SolidSmack readers, I'm Erin McDermott, and this is Beverly. Say hi, Beverly. She's shy. Beverly is an extended Ford E350 van with a high top, and I originally bought her several months before the whole global shutdown thing happened to turn her into kind of a Vanlife van, or at least a mobile office where I could work from as I travel around the US to meet clients. That's not happening right now though. So maybe you think that this is the perfect time to be doing van life, and you wouldn't be alone. It's trending on LinkedIn right now. There's a New York Times article that's talking about people dumping $100,000 to $300,000 into vans to live out of them and get out of big cities. But actually, counterintuitively for me, it's harder now in the global pandemic shutdown era than it was before this all happened when I bought her. And I'm going to go into those details because maybe they are points that you should be considering if you're thinking about doing this. But I'm going to do that from inside the Airbnb that I'm paying for because it's air conditioned and I'm dying out here. Whew, okay, so now that we're in air conditioning and I can kind of think clearly again, let's go over some of these points. Ignore the map behind me, that's just part of the Airbnb, it has nothing to do with me. The main points that I want to cover are more for people who want to be able to work from their van, and I'm assuming that you're going to be doing something similar to what I would need to be doing. I do optical simulations that requires 3D rendering on my computer and ray tracing. Maybe you don't need to do ray tracing, but there's a good chance if you're reading SolidSmack that you're doing some 3D rendering, and that's very power consumptive to do with your computer or your laptop. A little bit harder to do on the road, especially if you're not going to be hooked up to the grid while you're doing that. I'm also going to assume that you are in the category that is trying to do this on their own, or they want to do their own build and they're probably not going to be buying a brand new $80,000 Sprinter van, right? Maybe you're getting a used vehicle and you want to do the work yourself and you have limited time and monetary budget constraints that you need to consider. Those were the categories that I was in when I started this whole mess back in September. So let me share with you some of the things that I encountered. The surprises. First of all, just getting the van, I ended up having to spend a little more than I expected. I was looking for a high top and an extended, and I wanted enough space to be able to sleep and cook and work in comfortably. Those were hard to find. But eventually I did find one a little higher than I was budgeting. I ended up spending $2,900 on that. And it was old, and I was expecting there to be small things wrong with it, as you would. The insurance ended up being a whole other issue if you're like me and you've been mostly living in big cities and getting by with public transportation for the most part and haven't had a car, haven't had car insurance in a long time. You might get hit with a big rate. Now, with the pandemic going on and lots of people, not being on the road as much, some insurance companies have lowered their rates, but it's still probably not going to counteract how much higher your rate's going to be just for not having been on the road for many years, as was my case. Originally, I was looking at rates between like $1,500 and $3,000 a year for car insurance, so I would have been paying potentially more in car insurance than I did for the van itself. I ended up getting some advice and someone told me to look into registering it and insuring it in Vermont, which I ended up doing. That was kind of hard to do. It was a bit cumbersome to get it all the way up there from where I bought it in Ohio and then back to where I could work on it. But now I'm paying like $115 every 6 months. So it went from being infeasible to feasible depending on where you're registering it. So my time and cost budgeting that I had for the build itself was I was giving myself about a month, and I was budgeting cost-wise about $2,000 for the supplies. I thought that the teardown itself, just gutting the inside, the ceiling panels and the flooring that was in there, was only going to take a few days. That ended up taking several weeks and I'm still not done. That ended up being one of the biggest problems to me finishing in the 1 month time frame that I had. There were leaks in the ceiling, in the doors, and the floor. Once I pulled up the flooring that was in there, I saw that there are huge rust holes, and you can't build anything on top until you fix the frame of your vehicle, right? So that was a huge impediment. Additionally, I ended up having a bunch of clients who weren't supposed to be asking for any work from me ask for immediate, put out this fire right now, like over Christmas and New Year holidays. So that ate up the rest of my time that I had budgeted, and it just ended up not being feasible to finish it in the 1 month time frame. That's why right now my van is just like carrying my furniture around the country with me, and I kind of furnish whatever place I need to as I go along instead. I did, however, buy a whole bunch of things, and I was very close to doing it. I just didn't have the shell of the van fixed so that I could do that. I bought about $2,000 worth of stuff and probably like $350 worth of things from like Home Depot for glues and gloves and masks and, you know, just supplies like that. Now originally I thought that I could get by with 300 watts of solar panels, 3 individual panels of 100 watts each. I was originally going to build out a whole like solar system from scratch, personally for what I needed, but with all the additional time and money constraints that popped up that I wasn't expecting, I had to do it a little bit cheaper, a little bit smaller power reserves than I was hoping for, and a little bit simpler because I didn't have the time to actually, you know, like design it all out. So I went with the Bluetti 1500 watt-hour power station. I would highly recommend you check out DIY solar power with Will Prowse. I don't know how to say his name, but that's a YouTube channel. This guy goes over like how to build your own solar power systems for off-grid stuff. It's super helpful. That's where I picked, among all the things that he reviewed, which solar panels that I wanted, and also which generator or power bank I was going to buy. Now, 300 watts of solar power panels, you have to remember, isn't how much power that you're going to have to use for your electronics. That's only how fast you can charge up your battery. And so the battery was 1500 watt hours in the Bluetti solar generator. I would have liked more, but I figured that in the time frame that I would be using the van, which was going to be about 6 to 9 months, that should have been enough time for me to like travel the US and rack up some more customers and do the rest of the networking I needed to do for my engineering business to get like a solid customer base. I wasn't expecting this to be like a several years long thing that it needed to be good for, just like 6 months minimum, 9 months max. Your time frame is important because solar panels start to lose their efficiency very quickly. Within 6 months from when you start using them, you might be able to see noticeable declines, and the rates between the different companies and different brands of solar panels, they can decrease very differently. So this wasn't the type of thing where I could just start building it and then, you know, 6 months later pick it up. I either needed to start doing this right then and use my van to travel efficiently to keep bootstrapping my business, or I needed to just return the panels and do it another time. So I ended up returning the panels so I could maybe do it another time. Now, even if I had enough money and time and everything to finish the build, and I had it now, it would still be very difficult to work on it with just the 3 100 watt panels and the 1500 watt hour battery. Originally, I was thinking that that could get me by easily 2.5 days if I just needed to get my laptop working. But my backup plan for when I ran out of power was going to be to go sit in coffee shops and work from there. And this would also solve the issue of not having enough data if I needed to upload a video, say. Guess what? You can't do that anymore. You can't just go to some random state at any random time and expect to be able to find a coffee shop that has a power outlet for you and free Wi-Fi where you can just hang out for a few hours and do some work. All of a sudden that vanished. So power and Wi-Fi backup gone in these times. The other thing is climate control that you really have to think about if you're going to be using a computer for very intensive work for long periods of time. Now, even when I would be staying at like some multi-million-dollar homes in California in the San Francisco Bay, sometimes they didn't have air conditioning and my laptop would overheat and shut down. So how much more often is that going to happen when you're in a van? It's going to happen a lot. So again, my backup plan there, when I didn't have AC and it got too hot, was going to be, well, you can just go to a coffee shop and work from there when you really, really need to. Again, not possible all the time. You can't count on that anymore. Now, the opposite end of that spectrum, when you're not worried about your laptop shutting down, like me, is it gets too cold. And this has nothing really to do with the pandemic, but this did affect my budget originally and shrunk what I had left after I considered the heating aspect. Originally I was just going to find whatever cheap like $50 propane heater I could find and throw that in there and get by with that. But through the research I did, I found out that carbon monoxide, even at very low levels, can build up over time and potentially cause health problems. And most of the carbon monoxide detectors don't even test at those levels. So I decided I really needed to spring for something that was thought to give off less carbon monoxide. And so instead of just the Mr. Buddy propane heater, but with a catalytic heater, a Wave 6 Olympian, and that one is supposed to give off less carbon monoxide. So the Wave 6 was, I don't know, I think it was around maybe $250, $300, maybe more. So that was quite a big difference between the original plan I had for heat. But even if I were to have kept that and not have returned it like I did, it's not something I would want to do for more than that 6 to 9 month period I was originally intending on using the van for. Consumables, let's talk about those for a minute. Now, when you're roughing it in a van, there aren't a lot of things that you need. You've been able to pare down quite a lot of the natural creature comforts that we've become accustomed to as human beings. But there are two things that no matter how hard you're roughing it, you still probably want. One is toilet paper. And what has been especially hard to get hold of at certain times during 2020, I think toilet paper is one of the, I don't think it's news to anybody. And the other one is bottled water. Now, if you have a large enough water container in your van, you might not need to worry about this so much, but what I was originally planning on doing was I got a jug that was just under 5 gallons, and I told myself, well, if I need to stay out for a length of time away from civilization, that I would need more than approximately 5 gallons of water, and I could always just buy a gallon at Walmart or Target or gas station or whatever. What is the other thing that there's been a shortage of in 2020 irrationally? Freaking water. So the two top things that you would need as consumables to be able to live out in the woods comfortably if you haven't like fully stocked up your van with a huge water supply and a bidet have been hard to come by. So yet another reason why it's actually harder now during these crazy times to live in a van than it normally would be. Now, if you wanted to find alternatives, they do exist for powering up your laptop, for maybe even powering an alternate heat source or an AC unit. Things like heating and cooling are definitely things you don't want to do with solar power. It just eats it up way too fast. An alternative to that, and also powering your laptop, would be finding campsites with hookups. But there's two things you should consider with that. One is rates for campsites with hookups can be up to like $35, even $45, $50 a night sometimes, depending on where you go. And for that rate, I don't know, if you really want to be out in nature, it might be worth it, but if you're just trying to find some place to stay that's not like a crowded city during a pandemic, then maybe there's some alternatives that make more sense. For me, this place I'm in right now, I have a gas stove, I have a dishwasher, I have hot water and a shower, I have AC, I have Wi-Fi continuously, and it's less than $25 a night. So, you know, I'd rather be here than at a hookup campsite living in my van, and it's cheaper. But the other very important thing you have to consider that is related to all the lockdowns and everything is a lot of state parks and campsites have been randomly shutting down throughout all of this. So you can't count on them being open, even when it's normally a time when they would be open. And that's probably the toughest part about the whole thing, is just finding a place to stay if you're going to be doing this continuously. Again, if this is just going to be something you're doing like on the weekend or for a getaway, then this really doesn't apply. But if this is going to be something that you want to do all the time, even in normal non-pandemic times, finding a place to stay continuously, each place that you go, each city you travel to, or state, or region, or country, it's tough. And that got even tougher. People were getting kicked out of state parks where they were camping. Now, there are apps that can help you find places to stay when you're van lifing it, but even with that, in non-COVID times, it was difficult to find a place. But if you're curious, you can check out iOverlander. That's what I use now when I'm in between places, and I still sleep in the van in between when I'm moving. For me right now, everything is just on hold. I don't know when or if I will finish the van build, or really start it, because it was only ever torn down, and did some minor repairs, but I haven't really built anything into it. So I don't know if I ever will, but it's still a possibility. I haven't sold her yet. So if you ended up doing the van life thing, maybe I'll see you out there. And if you found any alternative ideas for some of the things that I brought up, or other considerations that you've had as an engineer who needs to work on the road, put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. And as always, for more details and links, you can check out the full article on SolidSmack.com. Thanks for watching.